I have a confession to make. I eat plastic. Not on purpose, of course. I'm not that weird. Raise your hand if you've eaten sushi, sea salt, or maybe even just breathed air recently. Everyone's hands should be up. Congrats! You've just consumed millions of microplastics. Microplastics are defined as particles that are under 5 millimeters. Now, to put that into perspective, look down at your fingernail. Hundreds of microplastics would easily be able to fit on just that. They typically come from the degradation of larger plastic debris, such as plastic bags and bottles. When I first heard that scientists had found microplastics in the human brain, heart, and even placentas, I thought it was a joke. It wasn't. And once I started looking closer, I realized that these tiny particles were everywhere, even in the most pristine cities in the world. All around us, stormwater runoff flows into roads and parking lots, directly into creeks and rivers. The water carries everything in its path, from tire dust to synthetic clothing fibers, broken down packaging, glitter. All of it ends up in our watershed. No pause, no second thought. That made me wonder, what's actually in the water around me? And more importantly, what is it doing to the life that depends on this water? So I decided to find out. But let me rewind for a second, because this all actually began in my AP biology class last year. One day in class, we were doing a lab experiment where we created marine ecosystems with brine shrimp and algae in order to observe the role of primary producers and consumers. It was simple: controlled variables, repeated observations, notes in a lab journal. But for some reason, it stuck with me. I remember watching the shrimp dart around in the small, clear bag. Fast, alive, responsive. Tiny creatures, but full of energy. And I remember wondering, what would happen if we change this ecosystem to better reflect our reality? Say, by adding microplastics? That question followed me home. It sat with me while I scrolled through news articles about microplastics. It echoed in the headlines about microplastics in seafood, in drinking water, even in the human lungs. And I remember wondering, how is this not breaking news everywhere? Eventually, I stopped wondering and started experimenting. I ran a 22-day experiment culturing algae and brine shrimp, two species at the base of aquatic food chains. I exposed them to controlled amounts of microplastics, polyethylene fragments ranging from 0 to 2.25 grams to be specific. Okay, first off, why these two species? Because if you want to find out what's wrong in an ecosystem, you start at the base. If that crumbles, everything above does too. For the concentrations of microplastics, I chose this specific interval to ensure that I was under the LD50. LD50 stands for lethal dosage that kills over 50% of a population. And previous research I'd done showed that 2.5 grams was the LD50. So to be ethically considerate, I chose 2.25 grams. Just to show an example, here is day 17 of my experiment. These are 5 out of 10 bags that I chose specifically in order to highlight just how noticeable of a difference there is with only slight increases in microplastic concentration. Okay, let's take a look. On the far left, that's my control group, with no microplastics whatsoever. This is the only group that was able to successfully reproduce a second generation. The next two bags are 0.25 grams and 0.5 grams. And while it isn't obvious in these photos, there was a slight reduction in brine shrimp population, as well as a decrease in algae concentration. Jumping a few intervals, the environment containing 1.75 grams has such a small population that it's barely visible in these photos. Finally, take a close look at the bag on the far right with the highest concentration of microplastics. Can you spot the shrimp? Here, let me help you out. There is one lone brine shrimp floating through the opaque, neon-colored water right in the center of the bag. Over those 22 days, I watched closely. My algae in higher concentrations, once a beautiful dark green, turned into a muddy-colored blob at the bottom of the bag, shrinking to half or even less of the amount that I'd initially put in. The brine shrimp, usually fast and agile, slowed down. Some grew abnormally, missing limbs, shorter tails. Others with bodies significantly smaller than the control group. I documented changes in growth, structure, and pigmentation. And that's when I realized just how dangerous invisible plastic can be. This graph shows that. While it initially looks like a bunch of scribbled lines, it's a representation of the data that I processed using a two-way analysis of variance calculator. Now, I want you to trace each of these lines with your eyes. Other than the bright red line, which signifies the control group, do you see any others that have two peaks? No. This is what I mean. The decline in survival rates due to microplastics halts the continuation of successive generations. This experiment became the foundation for my first published research paper, a study on the morphological impacts of microplastics on primary aquatic species. But after publication, I didn't feel like I'd done enough. Studying the problem wasn't going to solve it. So I asked myself, where do these microplastics actually enter our water? The answer? Stormwater runoff. Every time it rains, polluted water from our roads, our driveways, our sidewalks wash into drains and into natural water systems. So I designed a solution. I created a bioretention filter for bioretention basin systems that already exist in many cities. My design adds a layered filter beneath the basin with activated carbon, fine mesh, and bioretention soil. Think of it as a Brita filter, but for the environment. It's low cost, sustainable, and scalable. And if implemented widely, it could capture microplastics before they reach these rivers and oceans. But I'm not saying that I've solved plastic pollution. If anything, I'm far from it. What I am saying is that research and innovation at the student level can contribute to real-world solutions. And I want to prove that the ripple effect is real. Here's what I've learned from these experiences. You don't need to wait until college or a job or a grant to start making waves. You just need to start. Right now, right where you are. Because microplastics, they aren't waiting. And the ocean isn't getting cleaner on its own. I used to think that change came from people in lab coats and policy offices. People older, smarter, and better equipped. But the truth is, you don't have to be an expert to care. You just have to be curious enough to ask a question and stubborn enough to find the answer. Let me rewind. I didn't grow up believing that I'd become a researcher. I grew up loving water. Pools, beaches, aquariums. Water was where I felt most alive. Yet the more I learned about what's in this water, the more I felt a responsibility to protect it. Because here's the reality. Microplastics, they aren't just a pollution problem. They're a health problem, an equity problem, a future problem. They leach toxic chemicals. They enter food chains. They bioaccumulate in organisms, even in us. And they're permanent. Once plastic breaks into microplastics, they don't just magically disappear. They get smaller and smaller and even smaller. We are living in the plastic century, and future generations will inherit the consequences. So, we have two choices: ignore the invisible or confront it head on. I chose to confront it head on, and I hope you will too. Not everyone needs to publish a research paper or, build a filter, but everyone can do something. So here's my challenge to you. Ask a question no one else is asking. Start a club. Lead a cleanup. Advocate for better infrastructure. Check your products, your cosmetics, your cleaners, your laundry. Switch to bar soap. Say no to single-use plastic, not because it solves everything, but because it's a start. You don't have to fix the entire ocean to matter. You just have to make a ripple, because that ripple becomes a wave. And every wave that's ever changed the world started with one drop. So I'll leave you with this. What will yours be? Thank you.